Hello everyone, the Arnold Strongman and Strongwoman Classic rounded up this weekend with two amazing shows. I watched all of the men's show and unfortunately had to miss some of the women's show because I myself was competing on the Saturday, and the video for that will be out later this week. But today's video is going to be focused all about talking through the Arnolds event by event. But let me start off by saying I really enjoyed this competition. The Arnolds seem to have nailed it with the event selection, the weight selection. Everything looked about right. So it was a really fun comp, really entertaining. Both of them were, the men's and the women's. Now this video is going to be mainly focused on the men's because I did watch all of it and unfortunately had to miss a couple of events of the women's. But for the events that I did watch the women's comp for, I will be giving sort of my thoughts a little bit there as well. But yeah, it should turn into a really fun video, as we do with all of these fun strongman competition recaps. We're going to go event by event, give my thoughts, just have a general waffle. So if you enjoyed this video, go down below, click subscribe for more strongman competition coverage, but also for my own strongman training as I make my way through this amazing sport. But anyway, thank you guys again so much for watching. Let's get in to the Arnolds. So because I did compete yesterday, I am a bit fried and frazzled mentally and physically. So I've got my notes up on this laptop here, which I don't usually do for these videos. Usually I do it off the dome, but I want to make sure that I capture everything that I felt throughout all of the events because it was such a fantastic con. We've got 6 brutal events to go through. So let's kick it off where it always starts at the Arnolds, with the max elephant bar deadlift. So on this one, I mean, our main talking point for the women's side of the competition is Andrea versus Lucy, both pushing each other, both pulling some enormous numbers. But for me, my personal highlight was Jennifer Lyle putting in a fantastic performance. I'd not heard of Jennifer before this competition, and I was really pleasantly surprised. So for the women's side, that was a fantastic event, really awesome. Lots of the women pulling PBs on that bar as well, so it was just a really fun and entertaining watch. But the men's side as well was absolutely sort of mental, really. People coming into this competition were saying there is no way Mitchell Hooper is going to pull anything remotely close to £1,000. Well, Mitchell Hooper opened heavier than his final pull last year and made it look easy. That shut people up very quickly, and it just moved awesome. Now, this event, obviously, Max Boudreau and Tom Stoltman had pretty shoddy performances, but we kind of expected that from both of those. Max, we know that deadlift isn't his best event, and especially with his lat tear last year, coming back in to do the elephant bar is probably quite a big ask. And Tom, we just know his deadlift isn't there anymore. Hopefully it can get better, but it wasn't the greatest start for Tom. Evan Singleton put in some massive pulls. Evan, when I saw him do this elephant bar, I was like, Evan's in shape. Evan looks good. He did some really good pulls, and he has this wildly explosive pulling style, but actually slightly more controlled on the elephant bar than it has been in the past. It was really entertaining to watch. As I said, Bobby Thompson opened really heavy and called it after his second lift, which was an absolute grind. He really fought for that one. Now, the other guys, Austin Andrade, Trey Mitchell, also put up some fantastic numbers. It was a really entertaining max deadlift event, this, but the main talking point for this event, obviously coming in, was Thor's 501. Now, I made a video saying that it was just simply not enough time, and I didn't think Thor was gonna pull it, and lo and behold, I was right. Now, Thor's second lift was an absolutely awesome pull, just enough to win the competition without having to push anyone else. And when I saw his second lift, I sort of knew that I was right and that it wasn't going to go up. It wasn't as smooth as it has been in the past. There was a little bit of side rotation. It looked like one side of his was much stronger than the other, if that makes sense. There was just that little bit of a wiggle, which when you're lifting these kinds of weights, you can't have that, otherwise stuff's going to go wrong. And we saw that on the 501. Unfortunately, it didn't even break the ground. It is an immense weight, and I wish Rogue had given them more notice that they were putting this bounty on the elephant bar deadlift this year, because Thor, with a long enough and specialized enough prep, I think it's going up, but it's just too much of an ask for today, like I said in that video, which a lot of you guys said I was wrong about, but hey ho. But that brought an end to our elephant bar deadlift. Again, I love this event at the Arnold's. It's always good fun. Now, I would love to see maybe an elephant bar squat or something in the next few years, but the elephant bar deadlift is probably going to be a staple to stay. It's an absolute staple of the Arnold's, and it didn't disappoint. Now, the next event on day number 1 was the overhead gauntlet, and this one was really interesting. A lot of people online, myself included, were saying that the dumbbell and the stone were going to be a buy-in for a glorified log for reps, and that didn't end up being the case at all. That stone was messing a lot of people up, particularly on the women's side. Just loads of the women just couldn't get that stone sit right. A lot of people were getting lightheaded, but of course, Inez had a really good showing, even though she headed the stone. She did really well on this, as we sort of expected on the women's side. But on the men's side, this is where we started to sort of see the downfall of Maxime Boudreau. I had him predicted in my top 5. I had hope, but it just wasn't Max's day. He had a really big struggle on the dumbbell, really. The refereeing on the dumbbell for this competition was very, very strict, which was sort of nice to see, but also for me, it's just a bit unnecessary on the dumbbell. It was like a 2 or 3 second hold almost. 1 split second is enough on the dumbbell, but it caught Max out a bit. He finally got past it, but it just wasn't his event. The stone absolutely thwarted that, which is a shame, because I thought he could really do quite well on this. Now, Tom, he absolutely mogged the stone, but then he failed the big log, which again, for Tom, we were expecting him to hit that big log and do well on this event, but it just sort of started to show that this maybe wasn't going to be Tom's competition. Now, Lucas Hatton came up next. I didn't talk about Lucas on the deadlift, but he did some perfect damage control on the elephant bar, and he hit a massive PB. And Lucas, this competition throughout, just really, really impressed me. I made a video not long ago saying Lucas Hatton was going to be one of the main guys to be contending against Mitchell Hooper this year, and a lot of people, including Terry Hollins, said that I was completely wrong and that Lucas Hatton needs at least another year to get up to his best. And well, lo and behold, Lucas Hatton was pushing Mitch Hooper this entire show. He looked professional, he looked solid. I'm really excited to see him at every other event, but he absolutely mogged this event. He did really, really well. 3 reps at the heavy log. We kind of expected it from Lucas. He is a monster overhead, but he took first on this event. Really, really, really great performance. Now, another man I didn't really speak too much on in the deadlift was Austin Andrade, and I think the best way you could describe Austin this show is just solid. Every event he was there or thereabouts, doing a very, very decent, solid performance, proving that he belongs among these guys. He took 1 solid rep at the big log, and Austin was just a joy to watch this whole competition. He's one of my favorite guys up there. I love Austin and Nick's YouTube channel, and Nick as well, someone I haven't spoken about too much yet. But for his first Arnold's, he looked like he belonged. He did really, really solid. I'm sure he hit PBs in a lot of the events, and I'm sure he really enjoyed it because he bloody looked like he did. So I'm really excited to see Nick at Worlds. I think it's going to be a much better comp for him than the Arnold's. And yeah, these guys are just awesome. Now, Evan had a really interesting event on this one. He got through the dumbbell and the stone, but then he failed both of the logs. He didn't really get very, very good points on this, to be honest. And we were expecting Evan to do fairly decent on this, but log seems to thwart him in a lot of competitions, which is really, really interesting. And it's a shame because, as I said, Evan looked in shape, but it just looked like he was almost getting in his own head a bit a lot of the time in this competition. And it's a shame. I mean, at least Evan's not injured, and hopefully we could see peak Evan back at Worlds, where we saw him last year take 3rd. That would be awesome to see Evan have another fantastic performance at Worlds, but the Arnolds just didn't seem to go his way. And now another man who did very well on this overhead gauntlet was Trey Mitchell, getting 3 reps as well on the Austrian Oak. Just absolutely massive amounts of power from that man. He took 2nd on this event, but he did super, super well. And then the top 2, which we haven't spoken about yet, was Mitch Hooper and Thor. And now Thor did some fantastic damage control on this event. He got 5th in this overhead gauntlet, which I can tell you now no one had in their predictions. And this is where I sat back and I was like, wow, maybe I reassess Thor for this competition, because I didn't even have him in my top 5. And he's come out and he's got 5th on an overhead event, and his pressing looked decent. So this is where I was thinking, wow, Never going to underestimate Thor again. Never going to have him out the top 5 because Thor was in shape. And then Mitch Hooper doing Mitch Hooper things, just doing what he needs to do. He did the sketchiest Austrian oak clean that I have ever seen in my life and got 1 rep on it, which was just enough to keep in the points on this event. But God, it was a bit sketchy. If anything, Mitch looked more human at this competition than he's ever looked in any competition before. I mean, he still won it, but he was looking human on a few of the events. Now, one of those events was the frame carry, but we will get to that later. On the women's side of things, there was a bit of a sort of controversy that went on, is that Rebecca did really, really well, but then used liquid chalk, which was in the rules stated not allowed, so she was allowed to do it a second time. Now, a lot of people have said that that should have been an automatic 0. I mean, we've seen other rule infractions like Pavlo Kordiaka missing the line at Worlds, having an entire length taken off of his time. And I think Rebecca, as cool as it was to see her go again and smash it and get even faster, I do think some sort of penalty rather than a second attempt would have been more fair to the other girls. But what can you do? I guess that might have been in the rules that she got a second go, and fair play to Rebecca going out, doing it a second time, and getting even faster. Now, Inez made a statement, finishing the frame as well. Obviously, smashed her face off it last year. Really, really cool to see. And then on the men's side, it was a very interesting frame carry. We had quite a few finishers, but we also had a lot of people stumble at the exact same point just at the top of the ramp. Now, unfortunately for Maxime, he went absolutely rapidly up the ramp, but just as he crested the top of it, you just saw his bicep roll up his arm, as we so often do in Strongman, and unfortunately that was the end of Maxime's competition. Really, really unlucky for Max. I would have loved to have seen him on the stone to shoulder, but what can you do? He's joined the Strongman Bicep Club now. But yeah, that sort of scuppered my predictions for the whole competition because one of my top 5 was out with a bicep tear, but he was flying up that ramp before that happened. Now, unfortunately, Tom, Bobby, and Trey just had a bit of a nightmare on this event. Not an American nightmare, but just a bit of a nightmare in general. Trey barely managing to even pick it up. Tom getting a little bit of the way and then just sort of giving up, it looked like, which is such a shame. You could tell Tom's head had just gone by this point, which is so unfortunate to see, especially as he wanted to see, he wanted to prove a lot of people wrong. And then Bobby just struggling just because of those screws in his feet. And he said he re-aggravated it in this event pretty nastily. So got a feel for Bobby. He puts his all out there every time. Now, Evan was our first finisher. It was a fairly decent run, but it had a drop in that same place everyone else seemed to drop. Same with Andrade. He finished it, but he did a couple drops as well. And this is the same point that Nick Guardione dropped it, and then just having to re-pick it is so, so tough. So fair play to Nick. He got further than a lot of good guys have got on that frame. And then Lucas Hatton putting in another performance for me that solidified him as an absolute contender for not only podium, but for the win in this competition, getting second on the frame carry, which a lot of people were touting to be a bad event for Lucas, putting in a massive statement, getting it done in one run. Really solid from Lucas. And it almost was a first place because Mitchell Hooper dropped the frame like so many of the other guys did. But Mitch, when he dropped it, just instantly scooped it back up again and kept going. It was almost inhuman to watch him do that. But a drop on the frame for Mitch is obviously not what he wanted, but he still managed to take the event win, even with a drop over Lucas Hatton, who didn't drop it, which is just mental. But that rounded out day 1, and it was a really exciting day of competition. Proper staple Arnold's events on day number 1 with the elephant bar, the Austrian oak as part of the overhead gauntlet, and the timber carry. That is just classic Arnold's. But day number 2, Arnold's took a bit of a risk and did some very interesting events for day number 2. And I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed it. Now, event number 1 on day number 2 was, of course, the big jerk. And this was the event I was most looking forward to going into this competition. And unfortunately, I had to miss the women's and the men's big jerk. And I've managed to catch up on the men's just before their timber trial because I was obviously competing, as I've mentioned. So I caught up on the men's. And let me tell you, this was my favourite event of the entire competition, hands down. It was so much fun, and I wish that they weren't limited to 4 attempts. I wish they could just keep going because so many of the guys were putting up such big numbers with huge PBs. Obviously, no one hitting quite the top end that we thought we might be seeing in the 260s, but everyone doing some really, really solid attempts. Now, Bobby unfortunately tagged the platform with one of his attempts and the bar came down on the back of his head, which is never fun, but it meant that he was the first out of this lineup. Nick Guardione here really impressed me, getting a massive PB of 215 kilos, which is just mental. You could tell it meant loads to Nick because yeah, it's just a mental event to do a behind the neck, like push press, push jerk, whatever you want to call it. And to get 215 kilo up overhead for a guy who's not touted as one of the biggest static guys, it's just mental. Now, Lucas Hatton opened at 500 pounds, which was just mental, 227 kilos. And he just made it look easy. He made it look light work. His technique on this was just absolutely flawless. Evan, Trey, and Tom all did 232 kilos fairly comfortably. And Austin as well hits 232 for his last attempt, which for Austin is, again, massive PB and looked awesome. You could tell he was getting fired up for that. And now the big surprise to a lot of people on this event is Thor also getting 232 kilo after dropping 230 on his back in training. I wasn't expecting him to get 232, but he did, and he made it look comfortable. And this again was where I was kicking myself for doubting Thor coming into this competition because he was on form. Now after that we had Lucas and Trey both hit 237 and they both absolutely speed rep it. It was awesome to see 237 move like that. Then Evan took a risk coming out at 242 kilos and unfortunately failed, which meant he was down with his 232 kilo lift, which is unfortunate for Evan, but you've got to take the risk in these events to push the numbers higher and higher. And 242 was where some of our big pressers were sort of flattening out. So Mitch manages to get 242 and leaves it there. Trey also getting 242 and calling it there. And then Lucas Hatton comes out with the easiest 247 kilo lift just for an easy event win. And we expected that from Lucas. And this is why I wanted it to keep going, because I wanted these guys to have as many attempts as possible to keep pushing. Now, Austin Andrade got 232 on his last lift, and he looked good for more. So I would have loved to see him be able to keep pushing up. And similarly with Trey, Lucas, Mitch, all of them pushing beyond the 250s would have been awesome. But 4 attempts, you got to do what you got to do for the time. But I just wish we had been able to see it originally as we were, where we were just going to see as many attempts as they want to push as heavy as they want, because that could have made like for an unreal event. It was already a very good event, but that could have been unreal. And then next up was the timber trial, which had a lot of question marks going in to this competition. Will the sled be heavy enough? Will the logs be enough of a challenge? Is it going to be too light for the Arnolds? You know, those sorts of questions. And I'll tell you what, Arnold's nailed the weight on this. It was the perfect weight of sled where it was challenging, it was tough, but it wasn't impossible. We had everyone doing decently well on this event, and the big guys obviously motoring along the course with it. And Bobby actually had this really interesting technique, which I picked up on, where he was resting the logs on his belt to keep them off his knees and being able to move really quickly with the logs. But obviously the drag was a bit tough for Bobby with those injured feet. But I just wanted to point out that really cool technique of resting it on the belt, because I thought that was really ingenious of Bobby to do. Nick put in a very, very solid performance on this event, and this is where I was sort of seeing the sled weight and going, yeah, that's about right, because it was pretty damn tough, but he put in an absolutely solid performance on it. Tom came out and he put up a very fast time, and it ended up being sort of the time that people were aiming to beat. Very, very solid from Tom. Having that extra body weight really helps with these drags. Evan as well put up a very, very solid run, as did Trey Mitchell. Just pretty damn solid throughout this competition. Trey, apart from the frame, unfortunately, just solid there or thereabouts on every event. Again, apart from the frame, I don't want to call it the train. Austin again put in a very solid performance. Austin was someone who was just thereabouts on every event. Super solid, super consistent. Looked like he was absolutely supposed to be there and putting in an absolutely great performance across all the events. And obviously the stone to shoulder, which we'll get to, was Austin's bread and butter. But we'll get to that. Hold tight. Lucas Hatton absolutely motored down this course. He got just behind Tom on this event, which is a fantastic performance for Lucas. Again, lots of people didn't know where Lucas would place on this event, but he was just solid on this event yet again. And then Thor was the one to watch on this. He absolutely flew with this drag. No one drags like Thor. Loz has said it multiple times. Many people have said it multiple times. Thor can drag, and he managed to get it in about 31 seconds, which is just ridiculous, almost sub 30. Then did a very funny sort of celebration from the floor, which looks like when you tell your toddler they can go have a snack or something. It just looked hilarious, but Thor was absolutely monstrous on this event. And then Mitch Hooper, again, being pushed by Lucas Hatton on this event, and Tom and other people, but he managed to come out and get second on this event, which just for Mitch, top 3 or 4 on every single event is what you need to be. So this is where we sort of thought, yep, this is the Mitchell Hooper show. He doesn't have to do too much on the stones to win, but obviously Lucas Hatton, being in second so close behind him, was pressuring him. He had to actually do a decent performance on the last event to secure that win. It was definitely not in the bag. But knowing Mitchell Hooper, that's exactly what happened. And our final event, of course, was the Atlas Stone to Shoulder. Now, this had a few weird rules, like you had to return it to the pad, but nothing groundbreaking for Strongman. But this one I did manage to catch the women's side first, which was awesome because Angelica Jardine did absolutely awesome and actually had to fucking shot put one of the Atlas Stones back to the pad to make sure it hit. It was really fun to watch Angelica do that. Inez did really well as well, winning the competition, and Inez was just solid throughout the day. Really, really good and a deserving winner. Now over to the men's side. Nick managed to put up 2 reps at the lighter stone, which was really awesome. He had a very good technique with that. And then Bobby came out, decided not to attempt the stones, which I think is the right decision for Bobby. You could see his feet were really bandaged, and stones for him are a very, very difficult event anyway, let alone a stone to shoulder, because he can't do that triple extension, which is such a shame. But Bobby's a fighter. I just think he probably needs to take a bit of a step back now, get his body right, get moving right, and come back for something like Smo or the Arnolds, because he doesn't have his world's strongest man invite, and I don't see him getting one now. Because there's lots of Americans and not very many spaces left. So it'll be good for Bobby to have a long off season, perhaps get him to the World Deadlift Championships or something like that to put up a big number. But I enjoy watching Bobby. He's a real fighter. Now, Tom did really, really well at this event, got 2 reps at the heavy stone, which was an awesome performance from Tom and ended up the competition well for him. I mean, at least with Tom, you could tell with stones, he wants to come out and put on a show, but it wasn't Tom's competition this weekend. His head looked out of it. Things kept going wrong, but that's Tom, unfortunately, at the Arnolds. It's what we saw. I mean, we didn't see it last year. He came 3rd, but a lot of the shows that aren't World's Strongest Man, we don't see Tom in his best form, unfortunately. Now, Trey had an absolute nightmare on this event. He got 2 good reps, but he had about 3 good reps disallowed for various different reasons. One of them was slightly too quick putting it down. One of them missed the pad, and I think another one missed the pad. Poor Trey, because I had him to win this event, and he looked like he had the strength to do it. Just needed to hold it a split second longer and just have a little bit more control. But he got 2 good reps, which was, again, very, very good points on this. It was just the 3 that got disallowed. He would have been in the first place. Thor only managed 1 stone on this. He seemed to have a really weird technique where he was sort of like throwing and trying to catch the stone on his shoulder, and it kept hitting his chin. And it just didn't look very technical at all, but that's Thor. He's just got brute strength. Then Lucas Hatton did a very methodical 3 reps on the heavy stone. It just looked textbook from Lucas. It looked like a technique he had practiced time and time again. Just super technical, super well-rounded. And Lucas really impressed me this competition. He really impressed a lot of people. And I cannot wait to see Lucas Hatton at a lot of other shows this year. But the thing that had me out of my seat on this event, the thing that had me literally cheering at the TV, was Austin Andrade getting 4 reps at the heavy stone. Now, that is massive. I don't think anyone had Austin winning this event in their predictions, and I'm so pleased he did, because 4 reps on that heavy stone is just monstrous. And I'm so glad that Austin managed to get an event win at the Arnolds, because it was fantastic. And to do it in front of Arnold himself, in front of that crowd on the last event, it's just got to feel special. So that was just an amazing moment in the show for me. Probably my favorite moment in the show, full stop. It was just fantastic. But Mitchell Hooper, doing what he does best, comes out, does 2 reps at the heavy stone, just to cement the fact that he is winning the Arnolds. And Mitchell Hooper is still undefeated at any Arnold's competition, which is just ridiculous. He's got the 3-peat. He's in the conversation with the likes of Thor and Z. And no one can deny Mitchell Hooper is one of the best to ever do it. So that is my Arnold's recap. I really enjoyed this show. It feels like they nailed the event selection. They nailed the weights. There are a few weird little rules and quirks, but that's to be expected in Strongman. Overall, I was really entertained. Everyone showed up in pretty decent shape, apart from 1 or 2 people. But you know what? It was a fantastic show. I really enjoyed it. I almost enjoyed it more than I did competing this weekend. But you know what? That's not true. I love competing. But watching the Arnolds was an absolute highlight of my weekend. I am so pleased with how it went. And now we start the countdown to World's Strongest Man as our next major, which is going to be very, very exciting. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this Arnold's chat. Leave your thoughts on the Arnolds in the comments below. But I've been Toby. Subscribe for more Pro Strongman talk and, of course, also my normal Strongman training. And like the video if you enjoyed it. But I will see you in the next one.